So no matter what you do, no matter if it's woodworking or anything else, one of the best way to be efficient and get things done fast is by having tips and tricks. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you. Some of these tips and tricks are things that you've probably seen, but to be frank, there's probably one that you haven't. Before we dive into this video, I have a new project that I'm working on and I really need your input. I'm thinking about creating a step-by-step online course about woodworking. I want to make it something really useful to you, so I'd love to hear from you. There's a link to a short survey down in the video description. If you're interested in learning how to make some of the projects on my channel, please take a few minutes to fill out the brief survey, and I look forward to seeing what you guys are interested in. And with that said, let's get to the tips. For this tip, I'm going to show you how to make a really quick and simple center marking gauge. All you need is a piece of scrap wood to get started. Establish a line going down the center of that, then mark off 3 points in the center and the 2 sides for the pins. Now, if you want to make this even more simple and more approachable, you could use 2 round head screws and put those in place of the pins that I have here. And since this is supposed to be beginner friendly, we're going to assume that we don't have a drill press and we can't drill a hole straight. So take a piece of scrap wood, draw a straight line on it, then use that piece of wood as a guide. Rest the bit up against it and keep it straight with the line. So I know I didn't drill the 2 1/2-inch holes for the pins straight, so what we're going to do here is use wood glue to hold them in place. And finally, just check to make sure it's squared. On most marking gauge, you're going to see a pencil. For this one, I'm going to use a screw, and the main reason for that is durability. And if you've never used one of these, you're going to love it. Just simply place it down on your subject and twist it till both pins touch. All you want to do is drag it and create that line going right down the center. Now, one of the upside of this being a screw is you can adjust the depth of your scribe. So the more it protrudes, the deeper the cut, and could also mean a little harder to drag, but you will get a deeper cut, and you can always back it out so that you barely score the surface. As shown, this can mark multiple sides of materials. As long as you have a parallel line going down on both sides, you get that straight line going right down the center. And one of the first things you're going to pick up is some spring clamps because they're cheap. And then you're going to take them home and realize you don't use them as much. At least I don't. So I'm going to show you how to get an extra use out of these without just leaving them in the corner collecting sawdust. So these Bandy clamps shine really well when you need to attach a piece of trim. The way they work is you apply your glue and you just put that down. And the rubber here actually does a really great job of holding this piece down so it doesn't move. And it's really hard to use a bar clamp because this tends to want to shift. That being said, I'm gonna basically try to duplicate what this clamp is doing with these. All you're gonna need is some spring clamps and some rubber bands. All right, so what you wanna do here is now grab the 2 loops. And you can bring it over the top like that and leave it there. And do the same thing on the opposite side. And this is just a really quick temporary fix. And we want to take that and repeat the process again. And you can see there's a little bit of tension in here. Good enough to hold down this piece. Now what's nice about these clamps is that you can force them down a lot because you have a deeper jaw in here. So that's the plus side of these clamps. They're really cool, really innovative. And those are called Bandy clamps. And all I'm trying to do is utilize something I already have. And even having the Bandy clamps, there have been a time or two where I needed more and I just didn't have them. And this could have been an easy substitution. And obviously the rubber band's not gonna last forever, but if you're in a pinch, this is something that could probably save you and get you out of that pinch so you don't have to go crazy and trying to figure out how to attach the front. So next up, we're going to take on some right angle clamp jigs, and I think these are going to be the most used out of all of these tips. Now since this is going to set most of our right angle pieces, we want to make sure that this piece of wood is as straight as possible. I would also suggest going with plywood or MDF. I set the miter gauge to make a 45-degree cut, then I made the first pass, flipped the board around and then made another pass. So now I have two 45-degree pieces from the ends. I'm not always successful at this, but I always try to go for the simplest approach. For instance, I used the first cut to set up a stop block at the miter saw to cut down interference on the corner and also prevent the edges from being chipped off. We're going to remove all of those. The right angle corner can be a bit tricky, but if you set up a stop, you can then hold that piece down with a push block or something to prevent the wood from flying up as you're cutting. Up to this point, nothing has been measured. I'm just taking off some material and then duplicating the same thing to the other pieces. For this to be a true right angle jig, I need to cut a few holes in it, and I need to use a template. This way I can keep the hole consistent. I'm marking a location to drill out 3 holes because I feel like this gives me a little more flexibility. I used 1 3/8 Forstner bit, but anything in that neighborhood should work. If you're just starting out or you've been going at it and just don't have any of these, I would totally recommend you make at least 8 to 12 of these just because they're so handy. If these do not hold true to a framing square or something like this, I would totally say just remake them. It's not worth the headache if they're off even by a little bit. So we're gonna take one of these and now let's clamp it down to the workbench. Pass the clamp through. And again, this is why that 3rd hole in the middle shine, because it allows you to sneak under that wood and hold your piece. So the beauty of these is it doesn't matter if you're trying to do a corner or you're trying to do an intersection. And these holes are there to be used, so just use any one of them that you need to clamp. And if you remember these clamps that I say I don't use much, they work great for this as well. The bar clamp can work on this as well, but it's a little more cumbersome, and all you need from this is to stay in place and allow you to have your free hands so you can then join the 2 boards. So you may see this clip in an upcoming video, but what I wanted to do here was show how you can utilize a piece of scrap wood or sacrificial fence and use that if you need to make repeatable cuts that are different length. Now, I don't think it get much easier than this. I transferred the measurements once. I put them onto the temporary fence on the miter saw. Of course, if you have a miter station, then this is pretty much irrelevant. But if you don't, then this is a really quick and simple way to get you up and running to making quick and repeatable cuts. This is a really simple attachment. All I'm using is a 2x2 attached to the miter saw table, which is secured in place using the existing holes and long enough screws through the fence. If you used wood glue before, then here's a common problem you may recognize. When gluing multiple pieces of lumber together, the minute you put a clamp on, things start to shift. So let's look at a couple problems and then we can introduce a solution. First, I'm going to use 2x4 that has a little bit of a warp to it. Then we can look at plywood and see how these perform. And even though I'm using 2x4 and they do have a little bit of a cup to it, the slipping and shifting will still be an issue. I tried it with 2 pieces of wood and I still saw shift, and I'm gonna try with 3 pieces and see how much more of a difference it is. So you can see along the top here how they want to shift and go out of alignment. And one common approach in woodworking is to sprinkle a little bit of salt on the glued parts, and then that should prevent them from shifting. By using the salt, that completely eliminated the shift. I don't want to drag this out too much, but I guess it's best to show this on a smooth surface to see how it reacts with plywood. After gluing these up, let's look at it from a different angle. With wood glue in between, that's going to allow it to be extremely slippery until it's set up. The real problem here is when you have perfectly cut pieces that you want to glue together. But with only a clamp, you'll have shifted pieces and you'll then have to sand later. But let's look at how this reacts when you add a little bit of salt on these 2 pieces. So now that I have the pieces aligned together with a little salt in it, I'm trying to shift it the best I can, and it's not budging. So this goes to show that this actually works. If this is news to you, the way this works is once you apply a clamping pressure to it, the grain of the salt then bite into both pieces of wood, which then prevent the wood from shifting. I have used dowels in the past and they're great. They allow you to join things together without seeing fasteners. There are a number of ways to use dowels. You can use a jig like this, and there are many different jigs on the market, or you can just drill a hole, use a dowel center, and use that to mark. And although they're a great option for joining things together, they're still a pain in the butt to work with. And of course, I like to think about you guys that are just getting started and just don't have all the tools. So what happens if you don't have a dowel jig, or you just misplaced it? Or you know exactly where it is, but you're terrified of it because it let you down the last time. So I don't know if this has been done before, but I'm going to share this silly little idea to take a small nail, place that in between the two areas that you're trying to join. Now don't be afraid, you can add 1 nail, 2 nails, or 3 nails in here, but whatever it takes, just tape them down. This way nothing moves when you apply pressure. And just like that, the mark is now transferred to both parts and you know exactly where to drill. Now all you have to do is just flood the area with wood glue, clamp the pieces down, and you should have a solid joint. There is so many tips to the trade and I wish I can keep going, but unfortunately we got to bring this one to an end. Alright guys, so if this is your first time around, I don't mind sharing these tips and tricks with you, and I hope you enjoy these. If you guys are interested in more things like this, tips, tricks, and cool DIY builds, be sure you subscribe to this channel. Until next time, I'm Glenn, your host on DIY Creators, and I will catch you guys in the next one. And don't forget to subscribe.